Hello, welcome to Chapter 13, where we will begin tackling the subjunctive mood. Way back at the beginning of the first chapter, in the beginning of the term, when you began learning Greek, I introduced you to the fact that there were four different ways or four different moods that vira could appear as a verb. She could appear in the indicative mood, the subjunctive mood, the imperative mood, and the optative mood. So far, up until today, we have been dealing only with the indicative mood. But beginning this week with Chapter 13, we will now begin to shift to the subjunctive mood. The subjunctive mood is the mood of probability or contingency. Unlike in the indicative mood where we would say I loose the subjunct, we would actually include words that actually help us understand that there's a probability or a possibility here. So we would say things like I might or I may loose the subjunct. And you see that we have lu there with the subjunct, all right, to remind us that we are dealing with the subjunctive mood. Let's give you some examples. The indicative mood states a fact. It's raining outside. You can see the clouds and you can see the rain and the wind blowing and everything's wet, and that clearly indicates to you that it is raining outside. The subjunctive mood, on the other hand, allows you to look at the situation and make a determination that it might rain today. You can see that the skies are gray, you can see that there's some clouds in the air, but you've yet to determine whether or not it will rain. So when we talk about something going to happen in the subjunctive mood, we are talking about the possibility that it will happen, that it might rain. The subjunctive, though, can do other things. The subjunctive mood can help us to express purpose. For instance, I need to study in order to master Greek. It helps us to understand the possibility of mastering Greek if we apply ourselves to the purpose that is in studying it. Or the subjunctive mood can express a condition. If I study enough, I'll master Greek for sure. These are some of the ways that you're going to see that the subjunctive mood can introduce to us the realm of possibility or contingency in Greek as you begin learning them here in Chapter 13. Now, before we roll up our sleeves and actually get into the verb endings for the subjunctive mood, you need to be introduced to a set of words that are going to become very important for you for understanding the subjunctive and actually knowing how to translate it. And these are going to be referred to as red flag words. These are a series of words over the next few slides that you will see appear before a verb that is in the subjunctive mood. What I mean is that when we have a verb in the subjunctive mood, 9 times out of 10 you will see a little red flag word like the word hina that you see on your screen. And that word hina means in order that. And so, for instance, if it was hina luo, it would be in order that I might loose. If it was just simply luo, as you're going to see in a little while, then it's just simply I loose. But when that hina there, that'll be your clue that you have a subjunctive mood verb coming up and you want to translate it that way. Hapos is another red flag word that means in order that. When you see the red flag word aeon, it will mean if. Aeon luo, if I should loose. The word on means would or ever, and it's actually not ever translated separately from other words, as you're about to see here in this next screen. Take a look here, and we have the word hatan. Okay, hatan means whenever. It's also, again, one of those words that lets you know that there's a subjunctive verb coming up. Or hapo aeon, whenever. Hos aeon, whoever. Hos on, whoever. Ha-aeon, whatever or whatever thing, or ha-on, whatever. Again, you can see it just shows up in various ways. Ha-on, whatever things, and a-on, whatever things. Finally, heos on, until. Okay, these are all indicators that there's a subjunctive verb coming up. And then ume, which is a strong negation, means no or by no means. You'll be introduced to some other red flag words over the course of the term and as we go through the various chapters, but this is a good introduction to some of the red flag words that'll be there. And when you see one of these red flag words in the sentence, all right, that means that there is a verb coming up, usually immediately after that red flag word, which is in the subjunctive mood. So that should help you to recognize that learning the subjunctive mood is going to be a lot easier because you'll be able to recognize it by the fact that the red flag word immediately precedes a subjunctive verb. Now, as you know, as you've been learning all your verbs throughout this class, that every time you learn something new about a verb, it often means a new set of verb endings. And that's going to be no different in this chapter, but I think you'll discover that this chapter is going to be a little bit more easier for you than perhaps some other ones. Let's actually look at our verb endings by looking at not actually a paradigm with Lou right away, but let's take a look at the present subjunctive of Amy. Looking on the screen there, you see we've got o, ace, a, omen, eta, osen. And these are forms of the subjunctive that are the verb to be, that is Amy, that can appear on their own. So if you just had a o there, it would be I might be, or an ace, like as you see it there in the second person, it would be you might be, she, he, or it might be, we might be for omen, eta, you might be, or osen, they might be. The fact is, you're going to see the present subjunctive of Amy from time to time in the New Testament, but you're not actually going to see it a whole lot. The reason why I actually start with the present subjunctive of Amy is because these are the same exact endings that are going to go on the end of your present active subjunctive in the present tense. And if you look at these also, you'll notice that although they're slightly spelled differently, you'll see that they sound exactly the same way as the present active tense that you learned way back in chapter 1. O ase. Instead of amen, we've got omen, eta, osen. Let's take a look at what's happened here. In the subjunctive, you see that the verbs that you learned in the left-hand side of the column under the singular, for instance, o, ace, a, okay, you see how they're spelled there. What's happened is we've merely had a lengthening going on. The omega in the first person singular is the same, but in the second person singular, where you had epsilon iota sigma, now we've got eta iota subscript sigma, and where you had epsilon iota, we now have eta iota subscript. In the plural on the left hand, where we used to have amen, we now have omen with a long omega sound instead of the short omicron. In the second person plural, instead of eta, we have eta, and in the third person plural, instead of usin or usi, we have osi or osin. So the first thing you need to know is that in the subjunctive, what happens is we have simply lengthening. So let's take a look at our paradigms for what we have here, and here's some good news. The subjunctive mood only shows up in two verb tenses, ladies and gentlemen. It only shows up in the present and in the aorist. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the present active subjunctive. Here it is, once again, using our familiar stem of lu. And you'll notice that we've got luo, luace, lue, luomen, lueta, luosen. And for instance, with the luo here, if I had a hina, all right, that red flag word that I showed you earlier, hina luo, that hina would be my clue that it is that what I'm dealing here with luo is the present active subjunctive first person singular. That's how I'd parse that. It would be in order that I might loose. And I'm going to do some practices with you here on the screen before we go on, so don't worry. Or if it was aeon, all right, meaning if, okay, aeon luo, then I would parse that luo as a present active subjunctive. We're changing that I now to an S for the indicative first person singular. If I should loose. All right, or you can look through all of these various ones and you see that when we have them, all right, they all have a lengthening that's happened All right, the lues in second person singular has gone from epsilon iota that you're familiar with in your present tense verb with the indicative mood to now it's lues with an eta iota subscript sigma. Again, the red flag word will immediately precede this 9 times out of 10, which will then tell you that you are dealing with a subjunctive, and so these rather unusual looking endings that you see on these verbs will make sense to you. Therefore, you should have some comfort that although the first person singular of luo looks exactly the same way that it does in the present active indicative as it does in the present active subjunctive, the preceding of a red flag word will help you to know that. All right, what we're going to do before I get to any practices, I'm going to go through and show you all the paradigms that you become familiar with, and then I'll actually put some example sentences on the screen after I point out just a few things you want to be aware of. So this is your present active subjunctive. So far, I think it looks pretty easy for you. Again, red flag word immediately preceding the verb is your clue that you've got a subjunctive verb in the sentence. Now let's take a look at the aorist active subjunctive. Taking a look at this, there is a little potential room for confusion here, because you'll notice that the good news is that first of all of the endings that you have to learn for the subjunctive in the present active, let me go back. Look at those present active subjunctive verb endings, o, ace, a, omen, eta, osin, are the same ones that you have in the first aorist active subjunctive, o, ace, a, omen, eta, osin. The only difference between the present active subjunctive and the first aorist active subjunctive is your sigma suffix. Okay? The sigma suffix makes it luso, luces, luce, lusomen, luceta, lusosin, or lusosi without the movable nu. One thing to note about the aorist subjunctive is that when you move out of the indicative mood, the aorist no longer has an augment. So notice there's no epsilon augment here. On the one hand, that should be a bit of relief to you because you don't have to worry about the augment, or if it begins with a vowel, the lengthening that takes place on an aorist. So that should be a little bit of comfort to you. On the other hand, there is a little bit of potential for confusion here, because up until this point, what you've learned is that when you have a stem followed immediately by a sigma suffix with your endings, that you're dealing with the future tense. When we move into the first aorist active subjunctive, there is room for potential confusion, but really only on the first person singular, the luso. Because remember, keep in mind, if you have concentrated on how to spell your present active indicative endings, then when you look at your luces in the second person singular or your luce, for instance, in the third person singular, you'll notice that there is a slight change in spelling. In fact, we have actually got lengthening here. Okay? So that'll be a clue that you're not dealing with the indicative mood, but you're dealing with the subjunctive mood. Plus, once again, you will have 9 times out of 10, you will have a red flag word immediately preceding your subjunctive verb, which will be, again, your indicator that I have a subjunctive verb following in the sentence. So yes, the first person singular of the first aorist active subjunctive could pose some problems. However, that red flag word, okay, the hina, would be your clue here that you are dealing now with an aorist active subjunctive first person singular. With that in mind, let's now take a look at the second aorist active subjunctive. Take a look at the screen just for a moment and see what you can observe by what you see on the paradigm. Alright, if you're looking closely, you'll notice that the endings are all the same that you have in the present active subjunctive, the first active subjunctive. Okay, so the good news is, again, no new endings to learn here, or at least not multiple new endings. Okay, they're all very similar to what you know, just with this lengthening taking place with the initial vowels. But something else you should also notice is that the second aorist subjunctive also takes only the second aorist verbs that you've learned in your aorist chapter. Those 13 second aorist verbs that I taught you and I asked you to memorize as unique to the second aorist tense are the only verbs that can take second aorist subjunctive endings. So therefore, those are already going to help you. Again, also notice again that just like the first aorist, we do not have an augment on the front of your second aorist here. Okay, no augment. And again, how will you be able to determine that you're dealing with a second aorist subjunctive and not become overly confused? 9 times out of 10, this word will be preceded by a red flag word. Now, up to this point, you've been seeing that we have your active voice. Let's take a look now at your passive and middle voices. Just as you learned that there was a distinctive aorist passive in the indicative, there is also a distinctive aorist passive in the subjunctive. Okay. Notice here that again we have our same endings that you've learned already. So again, no different endings. Again, no augment. And just as you learned in the aorist passive, we have that distinctive theta is going to tell you that you're dealing with the passive subjunctive. Okay, and it will help you to recognize that you are dealing with a subjunctive, again, because of the red flag word. Looking at the middle passive of the present tense, once again, we have our stem. Now, in the present middle passive indicative, it was o my eatai, amatha esta untai. Once again, what has happened here is all we've done is we've lengthened the initial vowel on the endings, and now instead of o my, it's o my eatai, omatha esta ontai. Again, you'll know it's middle passive. How do you translate it and know that it's a subjunctive? Red flag word. In your first aorist middle subjunctive, same exact endings that you just learned for the present tense above, but again, the telltale sigma suffix, no augment, okay? And your red flag words will be there to help you. Last paradigm is your second aorist, and I think you're getting the hang of this. Once again, no new endings to learn, same endings you already learned for the present middle passive, just the lengthening of the initial vowel. O my eatai, omatha esta ontai, no augment, red flag word will help you. With that in mind, let's take a look at just a few things to note. Again, the subjunctive only appears in 2 tenses, the present tense and the aorist tense. And the aorist subjunctive takes the sigma suffix, but it does not take the augment that you're used to looking at. With that in mind, let me give you 4 examples here to help you as you begin approaching this, how you should translate and parse the subjunctive. On the screen, you have this sentence: Hino sozo tan cosmo. Hina sozo tan cosmo. Now, taking a look at that screen, when you're looking at that sentence there, you'll notice that your verb sozo looks exactly like a present active indicative first person singular, I save. But the reason you know here in this case that sozo is not an indicative mood but a subjunctive mood is because we have that red flag word there in the beginning, hina, which tells us that it means in order that, and it precedes the verb, so I know therefore that the sozo has to be in the subjunctive mood. It would be hina sozo tan cosmo, so parsing it, then sozo here is a present active, and now notice I'm putting an S there for subjunctive instead of indicative, first person singular, and the way that I would translate it is in order that I might save the world. And it's important here that when you translate your subjunctive mood that you get the word might in there, because we're talking about the realm of possibility or contingency here. In order that I might save the world. And so again, although we have a word here in sozo that looks exactly the same as the present active indicative, the presence of the red flag word hina immediately before my verb, it cannot come after it, it will always be before it, tells me that I'm dealing with a subjunctive verb in the sentence. And so I just parse it, present active subjunctive first person singular. Let's take a look at another practice sentence. Eon dax asso imauto. Eon dax asmo dia imauto. Now, aeon, we know, is a red flag word. So I know that my verb that follows this must appear in the subjunctive mood. Looking just beyond that, I see doxasso. Now I know that doxasso comes from doxazo, all right, which actually has a zeta in it before the omega. And so I can see here that I have a sigma. Now, if I did not have that red flag word there, the doxazo could look like a future tense, because that sigma there, all right, would look like a future tense of doxazo. But in fact, I know that it is an aorist, and I know it's an aorist because it's preceded by a red flag word aeon, and I know that only in the subjunctive do we have both present and aorist tense. We do not have any future tense. So, knowing that I'm dealing here with an aorist tense, even though I don't have an augment here, I can now parse it. It's aorist active subjunctive, first person singular, eon doxasso imautun, and I would then translate this, if I should glorify myself. Now, a couple of things to note here. Even though we are dealing with the aorist tense and you are used to translating it as past tense, once the aorist moves out of the indicative mood, the notion of time begins to fall away. And so you do not want to translate this, if I should glorified myself, but you would just translate it almost present tense, if I should glorify myself. And the reason that we do that is because in the aorist subjunctive, we move outside the realm of time of action just to talk about the determinative action. And we'll look a little bit more about this later. But it is something new to get your head around as you're translating an aorist subjunctive. And now it's just going to be simply, if I should glorify, almost as if you are dealing with a present tense. Let's take a look at another example. Hina baptisthomen. Now again, your hina, your red flag word, is your clue that you're dealing with a subjunctive in the sentence. Hina means in order that. Baptisthomon, notice that we've got a omen, your lengthened ending already that you're used to seeing with the subjunctive, but it is actually preceded by a theta suffix, which is your clue that you're dealing with the aorist passive. So I will parse this aorist passive subjunctive first person plural, hina baptisthomen. And in this case we would translate it, in order that we might be baptized. And in this case you want to have your be in there because it's passive, and it's in order that we might be baptized. Again, even though we have baptized here as ed sounding like past tense, notice that the overall sense of the sentence is in order that we might be baptized. This is that in order that something might happen. So again, all right, the in order that we might be baptized, but you still need to get that be in there, okay, for the passive voice. Finally, for today, with this, we look at aeon ace elthosin. Again, aeon tells us that we have a subjunctive coming up, aeon meaning if. Ace elthosin, I recognize elthosin coming from my second aorist. So this is a second aorist active subjunctive third person plural. That's how I parse this now. And I would, so if they should enter. Okay, again, even though it's a second aorist, we don't want to translate if they should enter it or if they might enter it. All right, it's just simply if they should enter, talking about the realm of possibility of something that might happen. All right, I realize that this is going to take a little while for you to adjust in your thinking, particularly when you're dealing with the aorist subjunctive. We'll work with this more in class together, and you'll get the hang of it as you do your translation work together with me and on your own. In preparation for your class on Wednesday, please learn the vocabulary for Chapter 13. Again, some new words to learn. You've had a bit of a break for a while, so we're back to learning vocabulary words. I highly recommend that you memorize the various subjunctive endings that I've given you there. Again, not too difficult. For the most part, it's just learning the long vowels that they've been changed to at the beginning and recognizing the various suffixes, keeping in mind that the aorist subjunctive does not have an augment. Learn your red flag words, ladies and gentlemen, because those are the things that are going to help you recognize time and time again that you have a subjunctive verb coming up in the sentence. And then finally, as always, complete at least 10 of the Chapter 13 practice sentences in the workbook for Chapter 13. And I will see you on class as we join back together on Wednesday.